If you've never worked with vectors, you're in for a treat. Let's find out how to harness the power of shapes and paths.
Photoshop's shape tools offer a powerful way to create vector graphics. What's that? You've never heard of a vector? Well, you're in for a treat. Let's back up a step. So far, we've been working with raster images made up of fixed-sized pixels. Vector elements are made up of line and or curve segments and have some unique differences. Vectors have sharp, crisp edges, take up much less storage space than pixel-based objects, and most importantly, vectors are resolution independent. They look great at any size. Let's open up a file. Inside our Chapter 8 folder, select the file titled Stars. I'm going to zoom in here to a 100% view, Command 1 on the Mac, Control 1 on the PC. Here we've got two identical looking stars. However, one is a vector shape, the other a raster shape. And let's take a look and see what happens when we make this image much larger. We're going to go up to Image, Image Size, and instead of a width and height of 720 pixels, I'm going to double that to 1440. We are now upsampling our image. I'll hit OK. And let's see what we've got. This star on the left looks pretty good, but oh my goodness gracious me. That star on the right is a raster shape. It does not hold up well in large upsampling moves. While you can see that on the left, we've got a great, nice, crisp looking vector shape. So that's one great advantage of vectors, is that you can create them at any size and you can enlarge them or reduce them with absolutely no quality loss. Now the first type of vectors we're going to talk about are shapes. And the easiest way to create a shape is using one of these shape tools. I'm going to zoom back out here. Actually, let's turn this layer off. It'll give us much more room to work with. We'll turn both of these off. The shape tool is located in the Tools panel just below the Type tool. If we click and hold on the tool, we see we've got a number of options, but if we look up in the options bar, we have those same shape options and a few more that I want to talk about for a moment. Here at the top, we've got our shape layer. This will create a shape layer when we draw. To the right of that, we have a path tool. We're going to talk much more about paths in the next lesson. Here we have a fill pixels icon that will let us create a pixel-based or raster shape. We've got our two pen tool options. Again, pen tool coming up in lesson 2. Here we've got our choice of shapes. We've got a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon, a line, and this amoeba-looking creature is our custom shape. Whichever shape we choose here, we have some very important options. I'll click here on this pull-down menu. We can choose to work in an unconstrained fashion. This means we can drag any dimensions that we like. We can limit ourselves to a square. We could type in a fixed size. If we know the exact dimensions that we need to be working with, we can type that in and simply click to draw the shape. We can restrict ourselves to a certain proportion or ratio. There's a From Center checkbox that will enable us to draw the shape directly from the center. That can be very helpful. And for all you web designers out there, this Snap to Pixels button should be checked. This will give you much cleaner graphics for the web. Now, which shape should we draw with first? Let's choose the polygon because that gives us another cool option. Here we can see that we can choose the number of sides that our polygon is going to have. Let's start with the default of 5. I'm going to simply click in the image area, drag with the mouse. Here is a big 5-sided polygon. As soon as you draw with the shape tool, your shape is filled with a color. By default, that is the foreground color. But if you have a specific color in mind, in the options bar, we have a color picker. We just click on it, and let's choose maybe something in this blue range. Looks pretty good. Let's try an 8-sided polygon. Let's see what that looks like. I'll set this to 8 and draw a new polygon. There we go, 8-sided. And I'll actually select a different color for this one. Let's go back down towards the oranges. That looks pretty good. Notice in our Layers panel we have added two completely new layers, specifically two shape layers. Raster objects and vector objects cannot exist on the same layer. So if you start with a raster object and you add a vector object, you will automatically have a completely new layer. But we can have multiple vector objects on a single layer. Right now we've been working in the new layer mode that's up here in the options bar. That's telling Photoshop to create a brand new layer every time we create a shape. Let's move to the add mode. This will allow us to add vector shapes to a single layer. So now with the add mode selected, I'm going to choose the ellipse tool and I'm going to draw an oval. Now we have, if you look in the layers panel, two shapes in our shape 2 layer. I can add a third here. Let's go with the rounded rectangle and I'll draw that down here. So we've got a total of 4 vector shapes, but only 2 layers. The last shape tool I want to talk about is the custom shape tool, and that's a lot of fun because this is going to give us access to dozens and dozens of pre-built shapes. If I select the custom shape tool here, next to it we have our shape options. I'll click here on this pull down menu. Here we've got a nice little listing of some shapes, but this flyout arrow on the right gives us access to a huge library of shapes. I'm going to go down here and select symbols, for example. Photoshop is asking us if we want to replace the current collection. We'll hit OK. And now look at all these that we've got down here. Let's choose the nuclear symbol. That's always a good party starter. I'll select that. And now, on our same shape layer, because we are in the add mode, I'm going to draw this nuclear symbol. There we go. How easy was that? Let's leave this image open because we're going to start here in the very next lesson and we're going to learn all about paths. We're beginning this lesson with an image from the previous one. If yours is not on screen, you can find the stars file inside your Chapter 8 folder. Paths are closely related to shapes. In fact, shapes are simply pre-built path combinations. Let's take a look at how to build paths from scratch. Before we do that, we're going to clean up things a little bit. I'm going to turn off these 2 shape layers and turn on this bottom layer. In the window menu, I'm going to select the Paths panel. We'll be using that momentarily. To create a path, we're going to use the Pen tool. The Pen tool is located in the Tools panel. Its icon is an old-style fountain tip pen. To use the Pen tool, you simply click and create line segments. So I'm going to click here, move up, click a second time. The space in between the 2 points at which I clicked is filled by a line segment. I'll click a third time over here, and now I'll come and close up this path. You see the hollow circle next to my cursor. That means we are going to close a path with our very next click. So there we have a triangle shape. In addition to line segments, you can make curves with the Pen tool. We'll go down here to do this one. I'm going to click. At our second point here, I'm going to click, hold the mouse, and drag to the right. And you can see now I've got some curve control points here. And I'll make a final click down there. I'll make one more curve shape. I'm clicking on the Pen tool icon a second time just to tell Photoshop that I am finished with that path. And this will give me the ability to draw a completely new set of line segments. For this third path, I'm going to click, drag down. There's my curve control points. I'm going to make a second click and drag down. And a third set, I will click and drag up. Once we've created the initial shapes of curves, we can go in and edit those shapes. In the Tool panel, just beneath the Pen tool, we have 2 selection tools. We have a Path Selection tool, which will select the entire path. What we're going to use first is the Direct Selection tool. This will allow us to select control points and anchor points. So if I go back up to this first curve that I drew, click right here in the center, you can see that I have access to this left control point. I can drag this out to extend the shape of my curve, and I can drag it up to bend it. If I click a second time here in this middle box, I get the lower half of that curve, and I can drag this one out, extend this up as well, and now I have a much more interesting shape. Well, that's all well and good, but what can we do with paths? Well, two things that we can do are fill and stroke them. I'm going to go back to the Tools panel, and this time we're going to choose the Path Selection tool. We now have three paths. We have our triangle, we have our wave shape, and we have this little squiggly guy down here at the bottom. If I select with this Path Selection tool, I can go to my Paths panel, click on this flyout menu, and I can choose to stroke the path. It's actually saying stroke subpath because in this single work path we have three paths. So I'm going to add a stroke, and it asks what tool we would like to stroke with. I'm going to select the brush tool. That's okay. And now we have a stroke. Where did the color for that stroke come from? Well, it came from our foreground color at the bottom of our Tools panel. The width and hardness of that stroke, however, came directly from our brush tool. If we go and select the brush tool, we can see that I've got a size of 40 pixels and a hardness at 100%. Let's change these settings. I'm going to go down to a hardness of 0 and make my brush size smaller. I'll hit the Enter key to close this box. And now what I'm going to do is go back and undo, Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on the PC. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select our Path Selection tool, click to select our path, and under Stroke Subpath I'm going to select the same options, the brush tool. This time, however, you can see that because I had changed my brush options, the stroke is completely different. I'm going to go and select this triangle up here because I had closed the path, and I'm going to fill it. So I'll go to Fill Subpath. We have a choice now if we want to use the foreground color. That's fine. We're going to leave all the other options at its default, and our triangle is now filled with red. One thing that's very important to understand about paths is that by default they're not linked to any particular layer until you fill or stroke them. Now, even if I turn off this work path in the Paths panel and you can see the paths disappear, the strokes and fills remain on the layer. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to save paths, convert paths into selections, and convert selections into paths. Let's begin, as always, in our Chapter 8 folder with the File Clipping Path. Now we're going to start out with a white layer. Let's select it in the Layers panel to make sure it's active. And in the interest of time, we're going to create a path with our Shape tool. Yes, our Shape tool. Remember, I mentioned earlier that we can create paths with the Shape tool if we select the Path mode. So in the Options bar, instead of the Shape Layer mode, we're going to click on the Path mode. We're going to use a custom shape. I'm going to change one option here. I'm going to select from Center. And in these shapes, let's choose a different shape library. In this right triangle, we're going to scroll down and choose Banners and Awards. We'll hit OK to replace the contents, and let's select this big old trophy. Now we're simply going to draw. And if you'd like to move the path while you're drawing it, simply hold down the space bar. That lets you move the path around the image until you have it precisely where you want it. That looks pretty good. I'm going to release the space bar and release the mouse button. It's important to understand, however, that when you create a path, it is not saved. The initial path is known as a work path, and you can see in our Paths panel it is named this work path. Work paths are temporary. They are not saved with your document. If I were to close this file right now, this path would be lost forever. Not such a big deal in our case, but let's imagine for a second that this was a painstakingly hand-drawn path that we do not want to lose. We move to the Paths panel, click on the triangle at the top right, and Save Path. Very, very important. We get to name it. Let's call this Trophy. Now, no matter how much we modify it or edit it, it will be saved with our image in its most current state. Well, what can we do with paths? We've seen in the last lesson how we can stroke them and fill them, but we can also convert paths into selections. At the bottom of our Paths panel, the third icon from the left is a Load Selection button. We'll press that, and now we have a selection. Well, what can we do with a selection? One thing we can do is fill it. Let's go to the Edit menu, down to Fill, and I've got pattern selected, and I'm simply choosing one of the 2 custom patterns that Photoshop ships with. So we'll hit OK. Now we've filled that with a pattern. We could also fill a path with a solid color. I'm going to click back on the path to activate it. In the tool panel, I'm going to click on the path selection tool, and I'm going to click and move this path. Notice we have a selection and a path. The path is separate now from that selection. By moving this trophy path, we can make a selection out of it. So I'm going to go back to our Paths panel, click on the Load Selection button. Now we have a selection active where we moved the path. Again, back to the Edit menu, Fill, and this time we'll just use a color. Let's choose something down here maybe. Hit OK, OK again, and there we go. So once we have a path, we can easily convert it to a selection. We can use that to make shapes. We could use that to make cutouts over images. Lots of possibilities there. We can also do the opposite. Take a selection and convert it to a path. Let's see how that works. I'm going to turn off this top layer. I'm going to deselect that trophy by hitting the M key to switch to the Marquee tool and clicking anywhere in the image. There's also a keyboard shortcut to deselect. It's Control-D on Windows, Command-D on the Mac. And on this background layer, I'm going to go to Channels. In this image, I have saved an alpha channel that is actually a silhouette of this child. I'm going to show you what that looks like. There is our silhouette. I'm going to click on the alpha channel, and at the bottom of the Channels panel, there is a Load Selection button. So I'm going to click that, and that is simply going to make a selection from this alpha channel. I'll turn our RGB channel back on, turn the alpha channel off. So now we have a selection, a tight silhouette around our subject. In the Paths panel, I can make a work path from this selection. It's the 4th icon from the left. I'm simply going to click. Now you can see that I have a work path. Now what did we say about work paths? They are temporary. If we close this document right now, that work path is gone. So we are going to go in our Paths panel, click on the flyout menu, and Save Path. We'll name this Silo, short for silhouette. Now what can we do with this path? Well, if you're working on an image that's ultimately going into a page layout program, such as InDesign, we can make what's called a clipping path. A clipping path will allow this image to be placed in a page layout and automatically remove the background image. Our selection is just of the child riding on this toy. The background, the sky, the mountain are going to be removed. We can convert our saved path, Silo, into a clipping path simply by going back to the top of the Paths panel and select Clipping Path. We're going to choose which item we want to make the clipping path. Here we have the choice between Trophy and Silo. We're going to select Silo and simply hit OK. Now, if we pass this image along to the page layout department and they were to place this in a magazine, they could choose any background behind this that they wanted to, or they could just let it float free on the page. So paths are very useful when you think about them as a method for both creating selections and receiving selections to make clipping paths. Photoshop offers a few very important options when adding multiple shapes to a single shape layer. Let's take a look at them. In our Chapter 8 folder, let's start with the file called Twirl Vessel. This file was created by New York City artist and illustrator Sarah Sills, specifically for use with this training program. So thank you very much, Sarah. We are going to click on the Shape 1 layer in the Layers panel, and in the Paths panel, select the Shape 1 vector mask. We're going to add a shape with the Shape tool, and we're going to use the ellipse. Now over here, we've talked about the New option, which creates a brand new shape layer every time we draw with the Shape tool. And the following option is the Add feature, which adds the shape to our existing shape. We're going to start here with the Subtract option. If I drag an oval shape and intersect this image, watch what happens. Note that my cursor has a minus sign at the bottom. This shape subtracts color from everything it touches, so where it intersects the vase, the color is gone. Let's undo that. Control Z on the PC, Command Z on the Mac. Our next option is the Intersect mode. Let's see what happens here. I'll drag another oval and we'll intersect the vase. You can see in the Intersect mode, it is only the areas of intersection that receive the color. Let's undo that. Control Z on the PC, Command Z on the Mac. And finally, we'll look at the Exclude option. One more oval intersecting the vase. And here with Exclude, it is the areas of intersection that are being excluded. These options can come in very handy when creating vector masks.